They say the Appalachian Mountains are older than time itself, born before the oceans, before the first stories were ever told. And maybe that's why the stories from here don't feel like fiction. They feel, remembered, passed in whispers, carved into trees, buried under cabins that shouldn't still be standing. In these hills, shadows move where no light should reach. People vanish without a sound. And sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, you'll hear your own name echo back at you, even when no one else is there. These are the stories that locals won't tell strangers, and old folks only mention after dark. If they mention them at all. You're watching Farcical Fears, where folklore rots into reality. If you've got the spine for it, hit subscribe, and let the mountains speak for themselves. Let's move to our first story. The Senator's Wake. They buried Uncle Ray on a cold Thursday morning, just a simple pine box, and a patch of dirt beside the tree line. No music, no sermon, no one cried. My mother stood 10 feet, back from the grave, arms crossed, jaw clenched like she was bracing for something to crawl out of the soil. When the gravedigger finished, she turned to me without a word, handed me a small brass key on a fraying leather cord, and said only, "It's yours now, but don't stay too long." I hadn't been back to Elkmont in over 15 years. The place was barely on any map. A coal ghost town that the rest of the world forgot. I'd grown up trying to forget it too. The winding roads that never quite led where they should, the neighbors who stared a little too long, the way the woods never felt empty. But when Uncle Ray died, something in me needed to see the cabin again. Maybe for closure. Maybe out of guilt. I didn't remember the cabin being so isolated. No neighbors in sight. Just trees. Thick, endless trees pressing against the house. Like they were trying to take it back. The air smelled the same though. Pine, rot, and iron. Inside, nothing had changed. Same green velvet recliner. Same glass lamp with the moths trapped inside. Even the same crooked photo on the mantel. A picture of Ray in a black suit, standing beside a casket, unsmiling. The dust was thick enough to choke on. The fridge was unplugged, the bed made. It was like he'd just stepped out for a minute, and never came back. I stayed the night, telling myself it would be one night only. The silence was too heavy to sleep through, but exhaustion eventually won out. Around 3 a.m., I woke up with my heart hammering. I didn't know why at first. There was no sound, no light, no movement, just a feeling, like something had shifted. Something wrong. When I checked the front door, it was locked, but outside, on the wooden steps. Someone had left a plate, a tin dish, old and scratched. On it, a piece of bread, a boiled egg, and a sprig of rosemary tied with twine. No note, number, footprints, nothing but stillness and cold air. I didn't touch it. The next day, I went into town, if you could call it that. A gas station, a diner, a church that hadn't held a service in years. I recognized Jeannie at the diner, though I doubt she remembered me. I asked if she knew anything about the plate. She went quiet, like I'd said something obscene. Then, she asked if I was staying at the senator's place. I half laughed. The what? She didn't smile. Your uncle was a senator, last one in the county. Took on the sins of the dead so they could pass clean. It's an old thing. Before the church came up this way, before graves had stones. People still believed back then. Some still do. I asked her who brought the food. Jeannie leaned across the counter and said, barely above a whisper, that food's not for you, it's for them. And if he's gone, they're gonna be looking for someone new. That night, I locked every door, every window. I turned off the lights, and still, at 3:17 a.m., exactly, I woke up again. This time, not from silence, but from a noise, chewing, wet, deliberate chewing, from somewhere in the kitchen. I froze in bed, too afraid to move. It lasted for maybe 20 seconds, then stopped all at once, when I finally got the courage to go look. The tin plate was on the counter, empty, clean, and beside it was a book. It hadn't been there before. A thick, cracked leather ledger. Inside were names, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, dates, and scenes. Some names I recognized, neighbors, family. Each one listed next to a confession. Adultery, 1984. Murder by arson, muy inocentes, yo intente sechi infanticide. 2001, and beside every entry was a red checkmark. All except the last page. The last page had a name written in fresh ink. N. Carter minus 2025. My name, no sign listed. No checkmark, just a blank. I packed my bags in a panic. But when I opened the door, the forest looked different. Too dark, too still, like it wasn't night. Just some absence of time altogether. Like I'd stepped into something older than the land. And there, at the foot of the steps, was another plate, this time with meat, raw, still bleeding. I didn't touch it. I slammed the door and stayed up all night, clutching the pistol from the mantel like it would matter by sunrise. The woods looked normal again, but the plate was gone. I drove straight to my mother's house the next morning, 3 towns over. She opened the door and looked at me like I was already dead. "You didn't eat it, did you?" she asked. I told her no. She went pale and sat down hard on the couch. Then she told me what I wish I'd never heard. When Ray was 15, his brother, my grandfather, drowned in a flooded ravine. No one could explain how. Ray claimed he saw something pull him under, something with hands that weren't hands. The next day, an old woman from town, someone they called Granny Ames, came to the house with a plate and a black book. She told Ray the mountain spirits needed someone to carry the sins, or the land would carry the dead. Ray was chosen, she said. The youngest blood always answers first. He ate the food, and from that day on, he was never the same. He couldn't leave the county. He aged slowly. People started whispering that he knew things he shouldn't, where bodies would be found, what secrets someone kept buried since the war. He became the sinister, and the mountain let him live, for a while, but when he got too old to keep up, he tried to stop. That's when the plates started appearing again, every night, for months. Until one morning, they found him in the woods, mouth stuffed with dirt, eyes wide open, like he'd seen something he couldn't swallow. He thought dying would free him, she said. But it doesn't work like that. You stopped the line. Now they're hungry. I left the house in a daze. I don't remember the drive. I barely remember the next few weeks, but ever since, once a year, always on the same date, I get a package. No return address. Just a brown box, tied with twine. Inside, a tin plate, a piece of bread, a boiled egg, and a small card with 5 words written in red ink. It's not too late yet. I've never eaten it, but the dreams are getting worse. And the last one. The last one wasn't just a dream. I woke up with dirt under my fingernails, and something cold and wet between my teeth. So if you ever hear about sinisters, and think it's just some old ghost story, don't take the plate, and whatever you do, don't refuse it either. Because the mountain doesn't forget. It just waits. Let's move to our second story. The Lantern Man. I was 12 the first time I saw him. It was one of those Appalachian nights, where the sky pressed so close, you could hear the stars crackle. My brother Evan and I had taken the long way, back from our uncle's place, up in the hills, a stupid dare. One of those little boy challenges that somehow makes you feel invincible. The woods were thick, and the trail barely existed, but we weren't scared. Not really, until we saw the light dot. It was orange, too orange, like fire through smoked glass, and it bobbed unnaturally, too steady for wind, too smooth for human footsteps. About 50 yards away, between the trees, it hovered low and slow, just beyond the underbrush. We thought it was a ranger at first, or a hunter, maybe, but it didn't make a sound. Not even twigs snapping. We stopped walking. So did the light. Then it started drifting toward us. I don't remember much after that, except running. I tripped, bloodied my lip, tore my jeans. We didn't stop until we hit the gravel road and saw the old mailboxes. For a while, I convinced myself it had been some weird torchlight or trick of the woods. But Evan was never the same. He didn't talk about it until years later. Not until our father died, and we both had to return to that hollowed-out town in McDowell County for the funeral. By then, Evan was a mess. Pale, jittery, living out of a motel an hour away from where we grew up. He said the Lantern Man had been following him ever since that night. I laughed at first. Thought it was his addiction talking. But Evan didn't laugh. He said, "He shows up when I'm alone. Always when I'm weak. Never closer than the tree line. But he's been getting braver." I didn't know what to say. 2 weeks later, Evan hanged himself in a rest stop bathroom, just off Route 52. No note, no warning. Just a message left on my voicemail the night before. I saw the light again. This time it spoke. I didn't listen to the message right away. In fact, I let it sit for days. But when I finally played it, I heard more than Evan's voice. Faintly, beneath the words there was a whisper. Not in English, not in anything I recognized. After that I started seeing him too. The first time was on the edge of my backyard in Asheville. I was watching TV when the power cut out, and outside, across the field behind my house, I saw a dim, orange glow. I didn't move, didn't blink, and I swear, the light moved like it knew I was watching. It was always the same. No footsteps, no face, just that lantern, flickering, swaying, watching. I moved 3 times. North Carolina to Kentucky. Then to Tennessee. Every time, he followed. Always outside. Always silent. But always closer. Then one night I made the mistake of opening the door. I thought, maybe if I saw who it really was, it would stop. Maybe it was just someone screwing with me, a prank, or an obsessed neighbor. But when I stepped outside, the light didn't retreat. It grew. It flared brighter, like a furnace sparking to life. And for the first time I saw something behind it. Not a man, not exactly, a silhouette. Tall, twisted, with joints that bent the wrong way. It held the lantern like an extension of its arm, not a separate object. And beneath the light, where a face should be, there was only shifting ash. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. I stumbled back into the house and slammed the door. But by then, it didn't matter. The lantern man had seen me, and once he sees you, he never unsees you. That night, I dreamed I was walking through the woods again, only this time, I was alone. The trees whispered. The ground pulsed like a heartbeat, and somewhere ahead, the lantern bobbed, calling me without sound. When I woke up, there was ash on my pillow. I tried burning sage, crosses, psalms. I saw priests, mediums, psychics. Nobody helped. They either didn't believe me, or got too scared to stay. One woman, a Cherokee elder named Ada, the only one who didn't laugh, told me something I'll never forget. She said, "He's not a ghost. He's not a demon. He's remembrance. He is the echo of sins that outlived the sinner. He carries the grief of the land. If you see him, it means you've stirred something buried." I asked her how to make him go away. She said, "You can't. But maybe, if you confess what you woke, he'll lose interest." That night, I did something desperate. I went back to where it started, to the exact trail Evan and I had taken as kids, overgrown now, reclaimed by thorns and roots. I walked until sunset, then waited. And just after midnight, there it was. The light, drifting through the trees, like it never left. But this time, I didn't run. I walked toward it. My heart nearly stopped with every step, but I moved forward, whispering the one thing I never dared speak out loud. I left him that night in the woods. Evan fell, and I didn't stop. I heard him scream, and I kept running. I never told anyone. I thought he followed me, but I left him behind. The light froze then, and this I swear, it flickered, like it nodded, and vanished. I stood there in the dark, alone, waiting for something else. Nothing came, no whispers, no shadows. I thought maybe that was it. Maybe it was over. But last week, I woke up at 3:09 a.m. to a glow outside my window. Not orange this time. Blue dot, and when I looked out, I saw a second lantern swaying behind the first dot. 2 lights, both watching, both waiting. The lantern man never left. He just brought a friend. So if you're ever deep in the Appalachians, and you see a strange glow between the trees, don't follow it, don't stare at it, and whatever you do, don't remember it, because once you see him, you can never forget. And that's exactly what he wants. Let's move to our third story. The Woman Under Dry Branch Hollow. There's a stretch of forgotten land, deep in Clay County, West Virginia. where the hollers twist so tight the sun barely touches the ground, even at noon. Locals call it Dry Branch Hollow. Not because it's dry, but because nothing's supposed to live there. No birds, no deer, no insects, no sound at all. It's the kind of place folks grow up hearing not to ask about. The old-timers will give you vague warnings. Don't follow the wind down that bend. Keep to the ridgeline. If you hear a woman crying, walk the other way. They never explain why. But in 1996, someone ignored the warnings. Her name was Teresa Gant, 29 years old, a folklorist and amateur ethnography from Louisville. She'd been writing her thesis on Appalachian death lore, banshees, mirror rituals, corpse candles, that sort of thing, and her research kept circling back to a single location mentioned in passing by a half-dozen different sources. Dry Branch Hollow, a place cursed by grief. A place where something was buried, not a body, but a sorrow so old it turned sentient, according to locals. Dry Branch Hollow was once the site of an isolated settler cabin in the early 1800s. A woman named Abigail Wright lived there with her children after her husband died in a mining collapse. The story goes that all 3 of her sons were taken, one by fever, one lost in the woods, and the third drowned. Alone, Abigail went mad. She begged the hills to return her boys, burying charms and tokens, and even pieces of her own flesh, in the earth as offerings. When nothing came back, she hung herself from a sycamore tree near the creek, and that's where the stories begin. Teresa, thinking it was just folklore, ventured out with a high-8 camcorder, a notebook, and a handheld recorder. She left her motel room at 6:12 a.m. and drove to the last point accessible by vehicle. After that, she hiked in alone. She was never seen again. Her backpack and gear were discovered 6 days later in the hollow, untouched. No signs of struggle. No blood. The camcorder still had battery. The tape inside was badly damaged, but a few frames were recovered. The last image shows a wide, root-choked clearing with a tree that seems wrong, warped, bulging like something inside it was trying to push out. Beneath it, a hollow in the ground, not dug, but opened. No body. No Teresa. The only audio salvageable from her recorder was faint and drowned in static, but just barely. You can make out a woman's voice, repeating the phrase, "You shouldn't cry where she cried." After that, the story became legend. Hikers, ghost hunters, and thrill seekers started showing up. Most left disappointed. A few came back, shaken. One man, in 2003, claimed he followed the creek bed for hours and stumbled into a patch of trees where the wind never stopped, even when everything else was still. He said he heard a baby crying from underground. Another group, students from Fairmont State, camped overnight in the hollow in 2011. All 4 returned. But one girl went silent afterward, wouldn't speak for weeks, just carved circles into her dorm desk over and over. She later told her roommate, "There's a face beneath the roots. It opens its mouth like a hole. I think it wants to be remembered." Locals eventually got tired of the attention. The old path was buried in brush. Signs were posted. Property lines redrawn. But even now, once in a while, a traveler disappears. The pattern is always the same. Last seen near the woods. Cloudy day left behind their shoes. One ranger who asked not to be named said something strange. Every time someone goes missing in that hollow, it rains for exactly 7 minutes the following day. No more, no less, even during droughts. They call it the widow's rain. But the strangest piece of this whole mystery didn't surface until 2021. A demolition crew, clearing an old storm-ruined bridge not far from the original trail, unearthed a buried mason jar, sealed with wax, filled with small bones, what looked like human hair, and a folded strip of parchment. Written in faded ink were the words, "Take my name, take my face, just leave the wailing in the earth." The jar was sent to a state archive in Charleston, but it never arrived. The courier's car was found abandoned outside Golly Bridge. Doors open, engine still running, no sign of him. The jar was never recovered. So the question remains, what did Teresa Gant find in Dry Branch Hollow? And why are some places so soaked in grief that they begin to take shape? Some say the woman under Dry Branch Hollow was never a ghost. She's grief itself. Hunger that remembers. Memory that grew roots. And when you stand in her woods long enough, she remembers you. Let's move to our fourth story. The Bell in the Black Fog. There's a town near the heart of the Appalachian Mountains that locals speak of with quiet dread, not out of hate, but reverence. Hesper's Hollow. You won't find it on GPS maps, only show an unnamed cluster of roads deep in the woods near the West Virginia border. If you ask at a diner or truck stop within 50 miles, you might find someone who squints and mutters, "Ain't there no more?" like they're spitting something bitter. But that's not exactly true. Hesper's Hollow is still there. A few homes remain buried in overgrowth. A gas station with a flickering sign and broken pumps. A church half swallowed by ivy. People live there, a few dozen, maybe. The census hasn't bothered in years. And those who remain stay for one reason: to keep others out. You see, every October, just after the last Sunday, when the nights are cold enough to frost, but not yet snow, the fog comes. Now fog isn't rare in the mountains, but this is something else. The people in Hesper's Hollow call it the Black Veil. It doesn't roll in like mist. It descends, straight down, like a curtain being dropped from the sky. It doesn't carry the scent of dew or earth, but something older, like burnt hair and old stone. And it doesn't obscure sound the way fog should. It devours it. Birds go silent. Crickets stop chirping. Dogs crawl under porches and whimper. The world becomes too still. And then from somewhere inside that unnatural silence comes the first ring, a bell, faint, metallic, and wrong, like it was forged out of rusted iron and grief. People say it doesn't echo. It vibrates through your bones instead, low and deep, as though the earth itself is humming. The first bell always tolls just after 2 a.m., the older residents say. It's been happening since at least 1931, though there are whispered stories going back further. That first year, 11 people disappeared in a single night. No bodies, no blood, no screams, just empty homes. And on each front porch, a small cracked iron bell, resting in the center of a wet, blackened circle. Authorities came, of course. Reporters, too. But no answers ever came. And the people of Hesper's Hollow, those who stayed, learned to live by rules. Don't go outside after dark in October. Cover all your mirrors. And if you hear the bell, don't speak. Not even a whisper. In 1994, a 17-year-old girl named Rachel Merritt decided to break those rules. Rachel was smart, sharp-witted, and endlessly frustrated with her tiny, superstitious town. She called the stories folklore, backwoods nonsense meant to keep kids in line. So on October 29th, just before midnight, she borrowed her dad's old camcorder, grabbed a flashlight, and walked out into the hills behind her house. Her last words on camera were, "If this fog eats people, let's see if it likes someone with a mouth." They found her camera the next morning on her front porch. The battery was dead. But the footage inside has become something of a legend in Appalachia. Not viral, not public. It's passed between certain people. Hunters, cryptid forums, folklore researchers, always shared quietly. Always with a warning. The tape is 28 minutes long. The first 10 are what you'd expect. Rachel goofing off, mocking the fog, shining her flashlight into the woods. But gradually, her tone shifts. She stops speaking so much. She starts glancing behind her more often. Then she says, low and barely audible, "I think something's walking with me." Around the 14-minute mark, the fog thickens. The camera quality degrades. The audio glitches. At 17 minutes, she gasps. Not a scream, more like a realization. She slowly pans the camera and whispers, "It's not just fog. It's moving." What she captures next is hard to describe. The fog begins to pulse, like breath inhaling and exhaling. Shapes swim through it, not solid suggestions of limbs, of something crawling not across the ground, but through the air itself. And then comes the bell. Low, hollow. It rings once. Rachel starts crying softly. "I didn't think it was real," she says. "I didn't think it would know my name." From that point forward, she starts repeating something over and over. "Don't answer. Don't answer. Don't answer." At 24 minutes, She drops the flashlight. It goes dark. The bell rings again, louder this time, closer. You can hear Rachel sobbing. She says, trembling, "It's not a bell. It's a mouth." The final 30 seconds are static. Then a single image appears, just a frame, a still. The camera had been lying sideways in the grass. But in that one frame, the fog parts just enough to reveal something behind her. Not a person, not a monster, just a towering silhouette. Too tall, too thin, and bent at the neck like it was listening. Rachel was never found. The town called it a tragedy. But those who still live in Hesper's Hollow understood. She was warned. She broke the silence. She answered the bell in 2013. A freelance journalist from Charleston, Avery Keene, came to investigate the fog legends for a Halloween article. She stayed in the town's abandoned lodge, brought night vision gear, did her research. Fog rolled in on October 27th. Her final voicemail to her editor came. At 2:12 a.m., it's not fog. It's not even air. I think I'm in something's mouth. She never called again. The next day, her room was empty. Windows sealed, locks intact. But on her bed, laid gently atop the pillow, was a rusted iron bell, cracked clean down the middle. Today, Hesper's Hollow is little more than memory. The last few families who live there won't speak about the fog. They board their windows in late October. They hang bells from tree branches, not to summon, but to warn. And they keep their children inside. Some say the fog is thinning each year. Others believe it's growing smarter, quieter. It doesn't need to show itself anymore. Just the bell, just the sound, just enough to let you know it hasn't forgotten. And if you ever find yourself in the mountains during a silent night, and you hear a bell, soft and distant, without a source, don't follow it, don't speak, and for the love of whatever is gods you pray to, don't answer back. Because the fog is not weather. It is not a storm, it is a caller, and it has your name. Let's move to our fifth story. Whispers from the Hollow. Deep in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, hidden from most maps and modern roads, lies a place known only to locals as Crow's Hollow. It's a small, isolated valley, surrounded by steep ridges blanketed with dense pine and oak, a place where sunlight barely reaches the forest floor, and time feels slow, almost suspended. The air here is thick with the scent of moss, damp earth, and something older. Something intangible that clings to the landscape like a secret whispered on the wind. Crow's Hollow has long been the subject of hushed stories among mountain folk. Tales passed down through generations like warnings folded in folklore. They say the valley is cursed or haunted by restless spirits, souls trapped between the living world and the dark unknown. But for many, those were just campfire stories, meant to keep children close to home. Eli Turner, a wildlife photographer from the city, was fascinated by these legends, but didn't believe them. To him, Crow's Hollow was simply an untamed wilderness, a perfect place to capture images of rare Appalachian wildlife and untouched forest. When he arrived in the nearby town, he heard the locals' warnings. They told him not to camp in the hollow after dark, that strange voices sometimes echoed from the trees, and that some who ventured too far never returned. Eli smiled politely, thanked them, and set out with his gear, determined to prove the stories wrong. His first few days were peaceful. Quiet mornings filled with bird calls and the occasional rustle of deer in the underbrush. But on the second night, something changed. As Eli lay in his tent near a cold, babbling creek, he began to hear faint sounds drifting through the forest, soft, almost imperceptible whispers carried by the wind. At first, he thought it was just the natural murmur of the woods leaves brushing against branches, the distant call of an owl. But as the night deepened, the whispers grew louder, clearer, like words spoken just beyond comprehension. Eli grabbed his camera and stepped outside, scanning the shadows. The forest was still, unnervingly so. The whispers seemed to come from all directions, threading through the trees like smoke. He raised his camera to record, but the playback was only static. No matter how many times he tried, the voices remained elusive there, but not captured by technology. As the nights passed, the whispers grew more persistent, almost urgent. They began to form words, Sentences, fragmented but chilling. Leave. Leave now. ... They watch. Don't trust the trees. Eli's confidence began to waver, but he chalked it up to exhaustion and the eerie atmosphere playing tricks on his mind. Determined to uncover the truth, Eli followed the whispers one twilight evening, trekking deeper into the hollow than he had dared before. The forest thickened around him, the trees older and more twisted, their bark cracked like ancient skin. At the hollow's center, he stumbled upon a clearing dominated by a circle of enormous gnarled oaks, their branches intertwining to create a canopy that nearly blocked out the fading light. The air in the clearing was icy cold, and a heavy silence pressed down, broken only by the faint hum of whispering voices that now felt like a living presence. Eli's breath fogged in the chill. He raised his camera and snapped a photo, the flash briefly illuminating the clearing. In that instant, shadowy figures flickered between the tree trunks tall, thin shapes that dissolved when he blinked. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. The voices whispered his name, soft but unmistakable. Fear began to gnaw at him, yet fascination rooted him to the spot. He realized these were not ordinary sounds, nor were the shadows natural animals, or a trickery of light. They were something else. Something ancient. That night, Eli's dreams were invaded by the hollow's whispers. They called him, beckoning him deeper into darkness. He saw visions of twisted faces carved into bark, ghostly hands reaching from the earth, and heard endless murmurs pleading, warning, and sometimes laughing in cruel tones. When morning came, Eli found strange carvings etched into the inside of his tents. Canvas symbols, like roots spiraling inward. Marks he didn't remember making. His skin crawled with the feeling of being watched. He tried to leave, but the hollow seemed to resist. Paths twisted unnaturally. Landmarks disappeared beneath the thickening fog, and the whispers turned mocking and angry. His compass spun wildly, and his camera began to glitch, showing distorted images of the forest that made his blood run cold. Days blurred. Hunger and thirst gnawed at him. Shadows moved just beyond sight. One night, glowing eyes blinked at him from deep in the woods, unmoving but unblinking. The whispers told him he was theirs now, a prisoner of the hollow's ancient curse. On the 7th day, exhaustion drove him to an old cabin, concealed by brambles and vines. Inside, dust-coated journals lay scattered, written by a man who had vanished in the hollow decades before. The entries told of similar experiences, the voices, the shadow figures, the trap of endless wandering. The final pages warned of the whisperers, spirits bound to the land, feeding on fear and silence, twisting reality to trap those who listen. Desperate, Eli read aloud from the journal, calling the spirits by name, refusing to be silent. The forest responded. Violently the ground trembled, branches groaned, and the fog thickened until he was swallowed in near-complete darkness. The whispers screamed, then fell silent. When dawn finally pierced the mist on the 8th morning, Eli found himself standing at the hollow's edge. The path back was clear, the voices gone. He escaped, but forever changed. Back in town, his photographs revealed unsettling details, faces barely visible behind trees, eyes glowing faintly in shadows, and in one chilling image, a twisted hand, reaching out from the black fog. Eli never returned to Crow's Hollow. But sometimes, on quiet nights, far from the mountains, he still hears faint whispers on the wind, calling his name, reminding him that the hollow never forgets, and it is always waiting for the next lost soul, willing to listen. Let's move to our 6th story. The Last Light of Timber Hollow. Deep within the Appalachian Mountains, hidden behind thick stands of oak and hemlock, lies the forgotten logging town of Timber Hollow. Once a bustling settlement alive with the rhythmic chopping of axes and the echoing calls of loggers, the town has long since been abandoned. Nature has reclaimed the land, swallowing cabins, sawmills, and dirt roads beneath thick vines and moss. The trees grow taller here, denser, and the shadows longer. The local townspeople from nearby areas speak of Timber Hollow with a mixture of fear and sorrow. There are stories of a night when the town's lights mysteriously died out, and no one ever saw them flicker again. Jacob Reed, an ambitious documentary filmmaker with a fascination for lost places and forgotten histories, had heard the legends surrounding Timber Hollow, and felt compelled to investigate. When he arrived, the few remaining locals greeted him warily, warning him of the curse. They told him about the last light, a flickering lantern carried by the ghost of a logger who had perished during the town's final days. This spirit wanders the dense forest, leading wanderers deeper into the dark, never to be seen again. But Jacob was a skeptic, driven by curiosity and the promise of uncovering a great story. Jacob set up camp in the skeleton of the old general store. The walls weathered and worn, the windows broken and boarded haphazardly. The silence here was almost suffocating, broken only by the occasional call of a distant owl or the whisper of wind through dead leaves. His first night passed quietly, with only the crackling of his small fire to keep the darkness at bay. But just before midnight, the stillness shattered. A faint warm flicker appeared beyond the tree line, a soft, golden glow bobbing gently through the dense forest. Jacob froze, his breath catching in his throat. He grabbed his camera, heart pounding, with a mix of fear and excitement. The lantern light seemed to float, drifting slowly among the trees, like a willow, the dash wisped. Jacob followed cautiously, the glow pulling him deeper into Timber Hollow's tangled woods. Every step he took was swallowed by shadows. The trees seemed to loom closer, their twisted branches clawing at the fog that now began to roll in thick and low. The lantern flickered ahead, never steady, sometimes near enough to touch, sometimes fading just beyond his reach. The glow seemed almost alive, teasing, beckoning. Hours slipped by as Jacob pursued the spectral light. The forest fell eerily silent. No birdsong, no breeze, just the soft glow leading him further into the unknown. His path became unrecognizable. Familiar landmarks vanished beneath the creeping fog. Panic began to gnaw at him. He was lost, but the lantern's glow was the only thing that kept him moving forward. Eventually, the light stopped before an old cabin, half collapsed and choked with vines. The door hung crooked on its hinges, creaking slowly open, as if inviting Jacob inside. His instincts screamed for him to turn back, but a mix of dread and obsession propelled him forward. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with dust and decay. Faded photographs hung crooked on the walls, black and white images of smiling families and sturdy loggers, frozen in time. Rusted tools lay scattered on a table, and in the corner, a worn leather-bound journal beckoned. Jacob opened it with trembling hands. The pages revealed frantic writings, warnings about the lantern, the curse of Timber Hollow, and desperate attempts to escape the endless darkness. The last entry was a chilling note. The lantern is not a guide, it is a curse. Those who follow it are doomed to become lost souls, trapped forever. Suddenly, the cabin door slammed shut behind him, plunging Jacob into near-total darkness. The lantern's glow surrounded him, but instead of warmth, it radiated a cold that seeped into his bones. The shadows inside the cabin seemed to twist and writhe, forming ghostly figures that flickered at the edge of his vision. His camera caught fleeting images, faces of anguish, twisted shapes, a gaunt figure carrying a lantern. Jacob tried to run, but the cabin seemed to shift unnaturally. Hallways lengthened, walls closed in, and every door led to another dark corridor. Time lost meaning as whispers echoed around him, names, pleas, curses, spoken in voices both desperate and cruel. The ghost of the lost logger appeared at the center of this nightmare. Hollow eyes, a face drawn tight with sorrow, silently carrying his cursed lantern through the endless night, for what felt like days. Jacob wandered this labyrinth of shadows and silence, struggling to hold on to his sanity. The lantern pulsed with a sickly light, a heartbeat in the darkness, and with it came a terrible realization. Timber Hollow was not a place you left, it was a trap. Every step forward only tied him tighter to the curse. Then, as suddenly as it began, the nightmare released him. Jacob found himself standing at the edge of the hollow, the fog lifting, dawn breaking over the Appalachian ridges. His camera lay in the dirt, battered but intact. The lantern's glow faded into the morning light, but the horror lingered in his mind. When rescuers finally arrived, they found only Jacob's abandoned gear outside the cabin. There was no sign of Jacob himself, no footprints, no trace, only the faint flicker of a lantern deep in the forest, waiting, always waiting, for the next soul foolish enough to follow the last light of Timber Hollow. Let's move to our 7th story. ... Double quotes. The children beneath the church. In the heart of rural Appalachia, atop a wind-beaten hill surrounded by misty valleys, there stands a decaying wooden church, white paint peeling, its steeple leaning precariously, and its bell long since silenced by rust. Locals call it St. Elias, though no one remembers who Elias was. It hasn't held a service in over 60 years. Not since the last pastor vanished and the congregation fled, claiming they heard scratching beneath the floorboards during the sermons, small, frantic, clawing sounds. Some claimed it was just mice or raccoons. Others whispered about the children who once lived nearby, children who vanished in the early 1940s, never seen again. Our narrator, a 48-year-old Appalachian folklorist named Mara Willis, didn't grow up far from St. Elias. Her grandmother used to tell her never to go near that place. "That church ain't empty," she would mutter while stirring the pot. "They buried something they shouldn't have, and it's still listening." Mara, now a seasoned skeptic and scholar of mountain superstitions, decided to make St. Elias the subject of her next podcast series. She wasn't afraid of old wives' tales. Or at least, she didn't used to be. With a handheld recorder and flashlight, Mara arrived at the church just before dusk, the amber sky glowing behind the building's silhouette. The church doors creaked open with the slightest push. Inside, it smelled of mildew, rotting wood, and something faintly sour like stagnant earth. The pews were overturned, hymnals molded and torn. The altar stood intact, but the wooden floor, before it was strangely warped, as if something had pushed upward from underneath. Mara began to record. Her voice echoed eerily in the empty space as she documented the chapel's condition. The carved symbols on the pulpit, and the broken stained glass windows that cast fractured light across the dusty floor. But then she paused. She heard something, very faint, but unmistakable. A child's giggle. Not playful. More like mocking. She spun around, light slicing through the dark, but the room was empty. The giggle came again, followed by a whisper, so close it might have come from directly behind her. When she turned, no one was there, but her flashlight caught movement beneath the floorboards. Not rats. Fingers, small, grayish-white fingers, writhing between the cracks like worms. She backed away, stumbling into the front pew. Her breath caught as the wooden floorboards before the altar pulsed, like something was breathing beneath them. She lowered her mic toward the sound, but when she played it back, what should have been scratching was unmistakably chanting, in children's voices. It was a rhyme, repeated over and over, distorted by static. "We're not dead, we're just asleep. Buried deep where no one keeps. Scratch the floor and sing our song. Bring us back, it won't take long." Mara's blood ran cold, compelled by both fear and fascination. She located the trapdoor behind the pulpit, partially hidden under a fallen rug and warped wood. The hinges groaned as she lifted it, revealing a narrow, rotting stairway descending into darkness. She hesitated, then began the descent. The basement was colder than it should have been, and naturally so. The walls were carved with childlike drawings in charcoal and something darker. Stick figures with X's for eyes, mouths sewn shut, children holding hands in a circle, surrounding a dark pit in the middle of the room. And at the center, the pit was real. A gaping hole in the earth, crudely dug, with layers of cloth, toys, bones, tiny bones. That's when the voices began again, louder, all around her. Giggling, whispering, chanting. The air became thick with the scent of damp soil and decay. From the shadows beyond the pit, she saw them. Dozens of childlike forms, pale hair hanging in clumps, eyes reflecting her light like a predator's. Not ghostly, not entirely human. Either things left in the dark for too long. Mara tried to run, but the stairs behind her were gone. Literally gone, as if swallowed by the basement itself. The only way was forward, deeper. As she backed away from the pit, a hand reached out and grabbed her ankle. Small, cold. She kicked, screamed, fled into the deeper corridors she hadn't seen before, narrow earthen tunnels beneath the church that should not have existed. In those tunnels, time began to bend. Her watch stopped. Her recorder malfunctioned. But the children sang louder. They whispered names, her name. They knew her. They remembered her grandmother. They said they remembered the promises made long ago, that she would come back, that she belonged. Mara was never found again. Weeks later, her podcast subscribers received a new upload. No title, just static. Then giggling. Then the rhyme again, clearer this time, sung in perfect, innocent harmony. We're not dead, we're just asleep. Come down here and take a peek. We've been waiting, here below, for you to join us, nice and slow. Since then, hikers report hearing a woman's voice echoing from the hills near the old church. Sometimes it's a plea for help. Sometimes it's singing. But no one dares go near St. Elias anymore, because no one who does, ever comes back. Let's move to our 8th story. The man who walks upside down. There's a whisper passed around in low voices in the old Appalachian towns surrounding Pine Gap. West Virginia names spoken less like a warning and more like an infection. The man who walks upside down. It sounds ridiculous at first, like a child's invented monster, something to scare their friends at sleepovers. But ask anyone who's lived near the stretch of forgotten road called Griever's Bend, and you'll hear that same look in their eyes. Not fear, not exactly. Something worse, recognition. They've heard the stories, and if you press them hard enough, they'll say they've seen something, not clearly, not long, but enough. Just enough to never forget. It started decades ago. Nobody can agree on exactly when. Some say it goes back to the 1950s, when a school bus skidded off the icy ridge one winter and plunged into the trees below. 19 children and 1 driver died on impact. The road was patched, signs put up, and the guardrail reinforced. But the strange thing is, ever since that crash, people have been reporting things that shouldn't exist. Not ghosts, not figures on the road, not screams in the woods. What they describe is something crawling above them, something wrong in the way it moves, the way it clings, the way it looks at you. In 1989, James Callahan was a young EMT in those hills. He never believed in superstitions until the night he and his partner, Ellen, were dispatched to mile marker 43 to check out a call box that kept ringing, even though it had been decommissioned years earlier. When they got there, they found nothing but rusted metal half buried in kudzu. The handset dangled from a cord that hadn't worked since before either of them was born. But as they turned to leave, James swore he heard something, a tapping sound, like bone on bark, high up, in the trees. And then came the voice. Not from the box. Not from the woods, from somewhere in his head, and yet outside of him too. As if the forest itself were whispering, "You're standing the wrong way." They looked up. At first, there was nothing. But then they saw movement in the canopy. A shape, no, a person crawling, but not on top of the branch. On the underside. Limbs stretched wide, elbows bent the wrong way, like a spider flattened and gliding. His skin was pale, tight, and his face, if it could be called that, hung beneath him like a damp, grinning mask. His eyes were black, but not hollow. They shimmered faintly, reflecting light that wasn't there. James said he couldn't scream, couldn't move. Something about the creature's presence inverted his sense of control. Like up was down, and left no longer pointed where it should. They ran back to the ambulance. But the man kept pace above them, crawling along telephone wires. Tree trunks, rooftops always above, never touching the ground. Ellen changed after that. She became obsessed with the ceiling of her apartment. Started sleeping under the bed, drawing strange diagrams upside down on the walls. One night, she showed up at James' house, barefoot and shaking, said he was inside her mirror, watching from the top edge. A month later, she vanished. The only trace was a deep handprint burned into the ceiling of her room, with fingers far too long and too many joints to be human. More reports followed. A teenager in 2002 went missing after saying she dreamed of a man crawling across the clouds. Her brother found her journal days later. The pages covered in diagrams that looked like anatomical sketches, but none of the bones were in the right places. An amateur paranormal group uploaded drone footage from the region in 2015, claiming they'd spotted a figure gliding under power lines. The footage was pulled after viewers reported vertigo, migraines, and even seizures. Most who saw it said the same thing. Something about the movement was wrong, as if their brain couldn't process it without glitching. In 2021, a girl named Briar posted a desperate message in a horror forum, claiming something had started following her after a hike near Griever's Bend. At first, it was just small things, footsteps on the roof at night, shadows moving backward in her reflection. But then came the waking dreams. She'd wake up clinging to her ceiling, body stiff, head tilted at a sickening angle, unable to fall or float back down. Her parents didn't believe her until they saw the ceiling covered in smeared footprints, upside down, leading from one end of the room to the other. Her last post was a photo. Blurry, panicked. It showed her bedroom from a low angle, with her hanging upside down from the ceiling like a bat. Eyes wide, mouth open in a scream that never made it to text, then silence. That's how it always ends with silence. People disappear. Stories get pulled. Memories fray. Those who survive say the worst part isn't seeing him, it's that once you do, you can never trust your sense of direction again. You drop things and they fall the wrong way. You hear footsteps above you when you're standing on the roof. Mirrors reflect things that don't follow your movements. Eventually, you stop trusting gravity itself. And that's when he starts showing up more often. First in the corners of your vision, then above your bed. Then, when you blink, you feel his fingers brushing your hair from above. James Callahan never left West Virginia, but he lives in a cabin with no second floor, no rafters, no attic. Just a one-room flat with bare light bulbs and a perfectly smooth ceiling. He told one final story before the interviewer turned off the recorder. Said one night, years after he quit, he came home to find his cat dead on the ceiling, stiff, mouth agape, claws dug into the plaster like it had been trying to hold on. On the floor, in a pool of blood, were his own footprints but upside down. Locals say the creature is drawn to people who've been flipped emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. Those who are grieving, disoriented, lost. That's who he finds. Because to him, those people already live in a world that's wrong side up. He doesn't have to twist their reality. He just has to show them it was always twisted to begin with. So, if you find yourself near Pine Gap, and the woods suddenly feel deeper, heavier, like they're leaning toward you. If your reflection starts blinking when you're not, or the footsteps above you come when no one else is home, don't look up. Don't acknowledge him. Don't speak his name. Because the moment you accept that the world is wrong, that's when he starts crawling down to meet you. Let's move to our 9th story. The hollow kind, they say. Not all places in the Appalachian Mountains are meant to be walked. Some aren't even meant to be seen. There's one stretch, deep beyond Farcical Hollow, where the woods don't follow the rules, where the air is too still, the trees grow in spirals, and the shadows seem to listen. The elders of that region don't just avoid it, they refuse to speak its name. The few who do call it the root line, but what they fear isn't the place. It's what lives beneath it. Not in the ground under, the skin of the world itself. The thing they call the hollow kind now. This isn't your typical local legend. It's not something written in old books, or whispered around campfires by bored teens. It's something that lives in the gaps, in the moments when reality feels a little too thin. Something ancient. Something that doesn't kill, but copies it. Began to gain attention after a series of disappearances between 2008 and 2019. Starting with a forestry surveyor named Dale Henderson. Dale wasn't superstitious, he was former military. The kind of man who carried 2 knives and didn't believe in ghosts or God. He was sent by a private logging company to assess a dense ridge beyond Farcical Hollow. The town advised against it. The elders warned him, saying the woods past the 5th bend were soundless. That word stuck with him, soundless. But he brushed it off. Dale entered the woods with a GPS, water, and enough gear to stay 2 nights. He never made it to the 2nd. On his first evening, as the sun began to fade behind the tight canopy of twisted trees, he realized something strange. His compass was spinning. Not slightly, completely, like the needle didn't know where north was anymore. The deeper he went, the more unnatural everything felt. The fog didn't roll, it hung there, stagnant, like it had weight. The birds stopped chirping. Not a single branch cracked. Even his own footsteps sounded muffled, like he was walking on sponge. That night, in his tent, he dreamed of his sister. Not strange in itself, except she'd been dead for 3 years. In the dream, she sat at the foot of his cot, smiling gently, saying, "Come home, Dale." When he woke up, he was freezing in. The cot was soaked through like someone had been sitting there, dripping wet. That's when he heard his name. Soft at first, whispered, coming from beneath the earth. Dale. He thought it was a trick of the wind, until it came again, this time clearer, inside his head, but not in his own voice. "Stay with us." He ran. He made it out just before dawn, barefoot, bloodied, delirious. His boots were never found. He kept repeating the same phrase to the paramedics. "It was wearing me. It was wearing me." Dale disappeared from public life shortly after. Moved to Canada. No interviews. Nothing that might have been the end, if the others hadn't. Followed. A teenage couple vanished in 2012 while filming a ghost hunting video near the route line. The only thing found was a phone with a single photo. A blurry shot of the girl standing completely still in the woods, eyes rolled back. Mouth unnaturally wide open, as if mid-scream, but silent. Behind her, barely visible in the mist, was another version of her. Same clothes. Same face. Smiling. In 2015, a local ranger found a man walking out of the woods, naked and silent, with deep scratches down his back, scratches that spelled the word home in mirrored script. His fingerprints didn't match any record. His face matched a man who'd gone missing in 1974. By 2018, the town started noticing stranger things. People would see themselves out of the corner of their eye, at gas stations, in bathroom mirrors, standing behind trees, always watching, never moving. When approached, these copies would retreat into the trees and vanish. But those who followed never returned. Locals began whispering that the woods had a pulse, that the earth itself had veins, roots that connected people's memories, grief, and regrets like a nervous system. The hollow kind don't feed on flesh. They don't need to. They feed on longing, that aching quiet place in your soul that misses someone, something, sometime you can't return to, and they offer your way back. But it comes at a cost. They say the hollow kind copy you, not just your appearance, but your memories, your voice, your emotions. They become a shell that looks so perfect, even your mother couldn't tell the difference. And then they take your place, quietly, patiently, without struggle. Because by the time they do, you've already let go. One last documented encounter comes from a retired vet named Elias Carter. In 2020, Elias entered the woods looking for his missing brother, who had been living off-grid in a cabin near the ridge. What Elias found was a journal, pages filled with frantic, handwritten notes that grew more erratic with each day. The last page simply read, "It isn't wearing me anymore. I'm wearing it." And then, silence. Elias never found his brother, but he said he saw him once more. Weeks later, standing on the edge of his backyard, still silent, smiling, he waved. And then he walked backwards into the tree line, never breaking eye contact. That was 3 years ago. Now here's the part that really chills me. Every year on October 9th, in the town of Fairlow Hollow, someone receives a letter in the mail. No return address, always typed. It simply says, "You've been selected. We remember who you were. It's time to come home." Number. One knows who sends them, but the people who get them eventually disappear. So if you ever find yourself alone, near Fairlow Hollow, and you hear a voice calling your name from the trees, don't answer, don't look, and whatever you do, don't follow. Because once you see yourself walking toward, you're smiling, that wrong kind of smile. There's nothing left to come back to. Let's move to our 10th story. The Man Who Whistled Wrong. There's a strange tradition that lives in the shadows of certain Appalachian towns, one you won't find in any travel guide, or even in the more superstitious local legends. It's not written down. It's not taught in schools. It's passed only from the old to the young, from the dying to the living. A warning, shared with a cracked voice and trembling fingers: never whistle after dark. And if you hear someone, whistling from the trees, no matter how familiar the tune. Don't answer. But in the sleepy town of Pinebird Gap, nestled deep within the folds of the Blue Ridge Mountains, someone did answer. And that someone was Joseph Whitlow. Joseph wasn't a bad man, just an arrogant one, 33, freshly divorced, with nothing tying him down but the deed to his late grandfather's cabin, which he'd inherited a month earlier and intended to flip for quick cash. It sat abandoned just a mile outside of Pinebird, where the mountain sloped a little too steep and the trees grew too close together. Locals said his grandfather went quiet in the last 2 years of his life. Said he'd stopped speaking, except to mumble strange melodies. Always the same tune. Always. At night, Joseph didn't care. To him, stories were for people with nothing better to do. He laughed when an old man at the gas station told him not to whistle while hiking. "You call in the wrong ones down from the ridge," the man warned, his eyes fogged with fear. "They answer back, but they ain't got lungs, and they ain't got names, just mouths." Joseph spent his first evening at the cabin cleaning, tossing out waterlogged books, setting up Wi-Fi. By dusk, the woods fell quiet, not in a peaceful way, but like the entire forest was holding its breath. Feeling bored and half-drunk on cheap whiskey, he stepped onto the porch and remembered the old man's warning. He puckered his lips, smirked, and whistled, for short notes, a tune he barely remembered from childhood, something his grandfather used to hum, and from deep in the trees. It answered the same 4 notes, perfectly pitched, no echo, no delay. He blinked, laughed, nervously. Tried again. 4 notes. 4 notes came back. Closer this time. He turned his phone flashlight toward the woods, but saw only darkness. The light felt swallowed, like it couldn't reach beyond the porch. The air thickened. The trees stopped moving. And then, he heard breathing, not heavy, not human, but shallow, rhythmic, wet. He backed inside and locked the door. That night, he dreamed of something standing at the edge of his bed, not moving, not breathing, just standing, watching, whistling, without lips. Just a raw, high tone from something hollow. When he awoke, the tune was still in his ears, and it didn't stop when he opened his eyes. The next day, Joseph tried to leave, got in his truck, tried the ignition, nothing. Tried to call for help, no signal, no Wi-Fi. Just silence, and the faint whistle echoing from beyond the tree line. But it wasn't always the same. Sometimes it repeated what he'd whistled. Other times, it changed slowly, adding notes, warping the tune into something older, something cold. That evening, he boarded up the windows and played loud music. Anything to drown it out. But the sound came through the walls, through the floor, through his chest. He began hearing it in water running from the sink, in the creak of the floorboards. He even tried plugging his ears, but he felt it inside his head. Then came the knocks, soft, measured. From every door and window, he held his breath. He didn't move. Then a voice, not quite a whisper, came through the chimney. "You whistled first." Joseph broke that night. He ran into the woods with a baseball bat and screamed, "Come on then," thinking he'd catch a prankster or some sick backwoods cultist. What he found was worse. He never shared exactly what he saw in those trees, but something followed him back. It looked like him, dressed like him, but didn't speak, just stood outside the cabin and whistled, endlessly. It never blinked, it never stopped. It just stared into the cabin until dawn, then disappeared. For the next 3 nights, it returned. On the 4th night, Joseph vanished. The cabin was found. Weeks later, in complete disarray, scratch marks on the floors, a shattered mirror, and a trail of small bloody footprints leading outside. Inside, scrawled over every surface in red marker, were the words, "Don't whistle, don't answer, don't listen." And over again, "You whistled first." Some hikers say they still hear the tune echoing from the trees, for simple notes, sometimes more. And if you're foolish enough to whistle back, the response is always instant, always close. They say it takes your breath first, then your voice, then your name, and when it wears your face, it whistles for someone new.